Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. We're going to get started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Mekla Krishnan. I'm the Shannon Landing Amos Associate Director for Museum Interpretation here at the museum, and we're so happy that you all joined us today for the High Museum of Art's annual Goodman Vigtel Works on Paper conversation. So this year, the conversation will focus on the incredible work of artist Minnie Evans, but this is a fund established in 2008 in memory of Goodman Vigtel. He was the director of the High Museum of Art for many years, and it directly supports all of the High Museum's public engagement related to artworks that are created on paper, as the name implies. He was the High's director for 28 years, and he sort of oversaw the transformation of this museum from a more modest regional institution to one of the preeminent art museums in the country. And we are always looking for ways to honor his work, and this is one of them. So thank you for joining us. This afternoon, the conversation is in conjunction with our exhibition, The Lost World, The Art of Minnie Evans. It's on view until April 19th, so if you haven't gone to see it already, we hope that you will check it out either today or in the near future, and hopefully this conversation will inspire you to see more when you go look at it. Today's speakers will explore Minnie Evans' extraordinary imagination, her legacy as a self-taught artist, and the continuing resonance of her imagery in contemporary practice. So we're in for a treat today. At the end of the conversation, there will be an opportunity to ask questions. You can submit your questions by scanning the QR code that you should have seen sort of rotating on screen while you were sitting in your seat. Don't worry if you didn't get it before, it will come up again at the end of the conversation, but if you just hold your phone on and turn on your camera, it will lead you to a link, and if you click on that link, you can submit your questions either anonymously or with your name, and that way our speakers will have plenty of time to read the questions and to answer at the end of the conversation. So before we get started, though, I'd just like to thank a few of the museum's generous supporters. Thank you to our exhibition series donors, Dorothy and Leo Rabkin Foundation, Delta Airlines, Sarah and Jim Kennedy, and Harry Norman Realtors. And as always, thank you to our High Museum members and the full High team staff for their essential support that helps make programs like these happen. Today we're joined by three distinguished guests. Hopefully you've seen their bios on the slides that were running before we got started. So I'll simply say that we're honored and excited to host this conversation between María Elena Ortiz, curator at the Modern Museum of Art in Fort Worth, María Korol, artist and assistant professor of art at Morehouse College, and our own Katherine Jentleson, who is the senior curator of American art and the Merrie and Dan Boone curator of folk and self-taught art here at the High. So first I'll invite Katie to come on stage, and then we'll get our conversation started. Thank you, everyone.
Great. Well, thank you all for coming out, especially on a kind of rainy Saturday. I wanted to start off by asking how many of you have seen the exhibit? Awesome. And the rest of you, there's still plenty of time. As Mekla has said, we have the show here until April 19th. And I wanted to start us off, for those of you who haven't seen the show, or those of you who it might have been your first encounter with Minnie Evans' work, I wanted to start us off with a little bit of an overview of her art and her life, and also some of the kinds of ideas behind how we put our exhibition together. So I'm just looking for the clicker. Is it on the, over here? Okay. Good, okay. Minnie Evans and her drawings of harmoniously intertwined human, botanical, and animal forms came from visions of the lost world, or nations destroyed by the Great Flood described in the book of Genesis. After her grandmother Merrie died in 1934, and the visions she had been experiencing since childhood became stronger, Evans produced a large body of work, mostly on paper, in a range of abstract and representational styles. Primarily using Crayola crayons and pencil, Evans experimented with compositions whose often complex symmetry and intricate detail resonate with the traditions of Hindu and Buddhist mandalas, known for offering representations of the interconnectedness of the universe. This association was never actually articulated by Evans herself, but it has become one of the most enduring of the many cross-cultural and trans-historical comparisons made about her art over the past 70 years. From infancy, Evans called the coastal city of Wilmington, North Carolina, home. When she turned 56, she shifted from decades of employment as a domestic worker to collecting admissions at Airlie Gardens, a destination for plant enthusiasts, especially famous for its hundreds of thousands of azalea specimens and stunning old-growth trees. Posted on the edge of one of the most beautifully landscaped gardens of the southeastern United States, she made art during idle moments and hung it on and near that garden's exquisite wrought iron gate, which bears a striking resemblance to the curvilinear twining that became a characteristic element in her drawings. In this way, she was able to sell or give her drawings to Airlie's visitors, leading to a reputation beyond Wilmington and eventually a 1966 exhibition in 2 New York churches that took The Lost World as its name. In November, we opened our exhibition, which reprises the title of that 1966 debut, The Lost World, not only out of deference to Evans's own interests in biblical and other ancient civilizations, but also because of how our project foregrounds the spiritual and historical circumstances of her extraordinary life. Our exhibition includes more than 100 drawings, as well as about a dozen of her rare paintings, presented in roughly chronological order, that unfurls her artistic development and offers a range of contexts for interpreting her art, from the extrasensory experiences of her dreams and visions to the double-edged realities of the extravagant but oppressive estate where she labored in the Jim Crow South. Evans experienced fame in Wilmington and beyond in her lifetime, including becoming one of the first Black women artists to have a solo show at the Whitney Museum of American Art in 1975. And after our exhibition closes here in mid-April, it will reopen at the Whitney in June of 2026, marking an important full circle moment for the artists and also an important milestone for the High because we have never sent an exhibition to the Whitney before, so that feels good. And we're here today to discuss various dimensions of Evans's work, but especially how dreams functioned as sources and pathways for the flourishing of the harmony between the real and fantastic that runs throughout her art. As Evans once said herself, "I haven't ever slept in my life without dreams. My whole life has been dreams." And so with that, I think we will begin our conversation. I'd like to invite María Elena and Maria to the stage, and we'll go from there. All right, and just a reminder to all of us to hold our mics very close to our mouths so that everybody can hear us. And if you can't hear in the back or anywhere else, you can kind of wave out and we'll try to do better. So we're starting on this subject of dreams, and I wanted to ask both of you if you could share a little bit about why you think dreams are such powerful forces for so many artists, and then as a kind of sub-question, how they can also function as a means of liberation.
Oh, hello. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm a painter, and I make drawings, and I'm also from Buenos Aires, Argentina, and we were just talking about how it's one of the most psychoanalyzed places in the world. So I have a little bit of authority to talk about dreaming because of that. No, I'm just kidding. I guess as an artist, the world of dreams is very inspiring because it is so empowering. It is a place that, you're relaxed, hopefully, you're in your bed, and you're accessing this space where your imagination is opening reality for you. So it's very interesting to me to know that she's taking all of these visions from her own dreams and being able to put it on a piece of paper. It's a very special skill. It's not always easy, But yeah, I think it is, you have all the power in your dream. It's your own imagination guiding you across this realm that it's inside of your head, but it is obviously fed by your daily experiences and what you know and what you imagine most strongly. So I think that's what I'm gonna say for now.
Well, first I want to say thank you for the invitation, Katie and everybody at the High team. It's just been wonderful to be here. And also congratulations on such a beautiful, thoughtful, and relevant show to have right now on the gallery. So I'm just happy to be part of that, even if it's, besides. Now, going to your question, I think that when we go around the world, our daily lives, we see a lot of things that are quite irrational, right? And in the case of Evans, and I've done a lot of research on surrealism in the Caribbean, which is a movement that started during the Second World War, when a lot of crazy things were happening. And when you start thinking about how is it possible that we rely so much on logic and on reason, yet we're here in a moment that we cannot comprehend, where people are just kind of killing each other left and right. And I think that dreams is a moment within our day that we experience images that are also non-rational, yet they allow us to create something new and to think about a moment, even in our daily life, in a new perspective, in a new way. So I think that dreams become, this almost like a meditation or a prayer, or this really moment of reflection in which we can start to consider how can we create a new reality for ourselves. And in that way, I think that's why they become liberating.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. And they're a place where, I think as you're both saying, the experienced world and the irrational world, or the speculative world of what might be possible and what you might not, what you might be scared to say, right, in your day-to-day conversations, can come alive. And this leads me to think too about some of the amazing things that have been written about Evans and other kind of visionary artists, or artists who attribute their artistic inspiration to dreams or waking visions, which is that these spaces, these kind of spaces of imagination and speculation, become ways to explain like their artistic creativity, which they otherwise feel like they might not really be able to justifiably explain. And we talked about this a little bit in relation to artists who come from marginalized backgrounds, right? So artists who are in communities where art making is not necessarily expected or embraced, even within a family. We talked about how Evans's husband, was really scared of the kinds of visions and dreams that she was expressing. So I wanted to throw that out there too, because to me that hits on this idea of liberation, right? That the dream becomes a space where you can not only experience but also explain like some of these things that you're going through. It's not really a question, but maybe we could talk a little bit about how dreams kind of provide that like rhetorical device, or that way of explaining things that otherwise cannot be explained.
Yeah, I'm thinking related to this question, but about filmmaking and how, for me, sometimes film can also be a way to access sort of a dream world. It's kind of like the most similar thing that we might have to a dream is like a film, especially if it's an old film where maybe it's black and white, maybe people are speaking a language you don't speak, but you have the subtitles so you understand. And it's a way of expanding what you're able to access in your regular day. Literature, same thing. And I guess I'm thinking about like the mind's eye and how the dream is a way of opening the mind's eye and accessing your mind's eye that is very specific. But then what I really admire about Minnie Evans is her capacity to then make the translation from accessing your mind's eye to putting it on paper, because that's like incredibly difficult. Like as a practicing artist, I can tell you it takes years and inspiration and seriousness and commitment to be able to say, I imagine or I dream this other beautiful reality, and then I'm able to put it on a piece of paper or on a canvas. And this is what's really impressive to me about her work. Seeing the show is just she does it over and over successfully.
Following on that, something that I find quite remarkable is her courage. Because I think that if, I cannot imagine being her, growing up in a particular context in the American South where people see you as one thing. The fact that she's thought, oh, I can be an artist, I can put that out there, I have something to communicate that is nonverbal, yet I know that it can touch another person at an emotional level, and that they're going to hear it and see me doing it. That to me is like what I aspire to be in terms of courage. So so kind of going to this idea of dreams, I think that dreams, it's just another space in which to communicate.
Absolutely, and she had, a couple of key people in her life who encouraged that, right, and who reinforced that courage. Her grandmother, and that's why, as I was mentioning earlier, she really began drawing after her grandmother passed away. And so it was this kind of moment in her life where she lost this matriarchal figure, and she found that courage to do the thing that her grandmother always told her, this is a gift, and you're special, and some people think what's happening to you is strange, but I know that you're going to be something amazing someday. And then her second encounter like that was with a fortune teller, and you can learn more about that in the show, but it's a pretty amazing story about how a fortune teller told her in 1944 that if she didn't keep making her drawings and paintings, the war wasn't going to end. And then I won't spoil the ending of where it goes from there, but it's pretty incredible. So she was mixing the real and the imagined in these works, and one of the things that I wanted to talk about and give people a sense for was this beautiful place where she lived, this part of North Carolina that's in the Cape Fear River Basin, right on the Atlantic Ocean, but all around all these other bodies of water, creating this really rich ecosystem that became Airlie Gardens, right? So the wealthy family that she worked for her most of her adult life created this finely manicured botanical garden that's still open to the public, and you're seeing like photographs that I took there over the past couple of years. And you can see how like the natural forms are both very orderly, like the symmetry of a butterfly or a plot of tulips that have been carefully planted, but it's also kind of surreal and mysterious. Like you've got these old growth trees, wild sunflower fields, Spanish moss hanging from statuary. And so this was the kind of thing that she was around. And she certainly was looking at specific things in the garden. The Airlie oak is one of its most famous features. It's an over 500-year-old oak tree with like a 25-foot circumference. Just an absolutely amazing thing to behold. And she made this incredible tribute to it in 1954. But a lot of the time she was picking up the motifs of the natural world that she was around and incorporating it into things like what you see here. So looking at the coastal sunrise and sunset and pulling it into these complex other kinds of compositions. She wasn't like a naturalist who was sitting down with plant specimens and painting them carefully for their detail. She was creating this abundance and overflowing world filled with all of these natural forms. And so this is what I wanted to talk about a little bit, was how you think that the nature, the different, the plants and the seeds and the flowers, the trees, all of those different elements are functioning on another level with her. We talked a little bit about how, Maria, you think that there's a kind of symbolism. So can you speak a little bit about that?
Yes, absolutely. So I have a few things that I was thinking about when I was looking at this work. I like that you used the word abundance, because that's definitely something that I was feeling was life, energy, vibrancy. All these plants that she paints seem to be at their peak. They're very green, very luscious, very alive. And I was asking myself, what does this mean, as a message to have this type of motif over and over? And the way that I interpreted it was life force and a form of resistance even though this garden, I feel like in terms of composition, like the early gardens seem like a very manicured, natural setting. So that makes me understand the perfect symmetry, because I was also wondering like, oh, she's playing with these plant forms, and in a wild setting, it would be less orderly. But I think maybe because she was in such a like manicured, manipulated sort of natural landscape, then she also like reflects this in her pieces, which is this sense of order and symmetry. And then I was thinking about her, as the gatekeeper and drawing there and sort of looking at the beautiful natural environment, the beach, the gardens, and her devotion and her religiosity, her belief, and becoming herself a creator, kind of like matching all that beauty with her own works and saying, with my hand and these crayon pencils and this piece of paper, I can do that too. I can create something really beautiful that will last years. So that is very courageous and very admirable. And putting a drawing next to a natural environment and for that drawing to hold up is incredible. It's like, you're a good artist if you're able to do that. And I think she knew she was very good at it. And then so a kind of attitude that I started to feel coming from the work and from her was this attitude of, I'm here, I'm empowered, my dreams are valid, and they're gorgeous, and this is what I have to give the world. And I think it's very interesting that she presented all of these as visions and as God telling her to do all these things, because it's very selfless. It's like the opposite of a lot of artists who want to be like, this is my name and this is what I do. It's like she's just like a vehicle for this gorgeousness to come through her hand.
Yeah, and in a work like this, and we have a really amazing collection of her collages in the exhibition, because what you're looking at isn't just one drawing. It's a series of drawings that she cut out and then put onto a kind of canvas or a paper board, and then kept painting and drawing all around. And so just to your point of like matching this like overflowing abundant beauty of a place like Early Gardens or the coasts of North Carolina, she did that, right? As she kind of got better and more confident in her art making, she took things she'd made and turned them into these like masterpieces that are nothing if not overflowing. But this kind of duality too is something that I wanted you to talk a little bit about, María Elena, about the garden as a space of beauty, but also as a space of decay, of danger, and the way that nature, always has those kind of two sides, because that was a connection. So one thing I wanted to mention was that María Elena wrote a beautiful essay for the exhibition's catalog, which is on sale. You can get it online or in our gift shop. And what your essay really focused on was placing her right within this larger context of Caribbean surrealism and thinking about her speculative relationships to people like Wilfredo Lam, who's also having a big moment right now. So did you want to say a little bit about what you said in your essay about these two works?
Yes. And I also wanted to say something else about the garden too, because for the majority of her career, right, she was creating works about a place that wasn't public, right? That people could not access. So I think that it's also good to point out that she's sharing with the regular, because it was a private space, that big mansion where the garden was. Now, in terms of my essay and my interest in placing her in connection to artistic practices that speak to a Black diaspora in the terms of surrealism, what you're seeing right now is two works. One, this work by Wilfredo Lam, who is perhaps, it's his masterpiece, which is owned by the Museum of Modern Art in New York, which is called The Jungle. And in it, you see this quite surrealist depiction of what is actually like sugar canes. And you see buttocks and different objects embedded in that landscape, very much alluding to the sugarcane was the primary crop in terms of enslaved people in the Caribbean, and he's making a social critique of that space in the region. And then on the other side, you see Minnie Evans' mosquito bombs, in which is also a reflection using the garden to allude to World War II planes that are being very much almost invading the garden. And you can imagine in 1943, in a year that Black Americans were, and also Puerto Ricans, which is, if you're wondering where I'm from, I was born and raised in Puerto Rico, you do not have access to regular kind of life than other Americans, yet you're expected to be part of the military and defend the country. So here you see two artists that are very much thinking about landscape to create a social commentary for their times. And I think that, it's like going back to this notion that she worked at this garden. So the garden was this beautiful place, but it's also a place of labor. And a lot of us go to work, and we don't idealize our workplaces. So there's certainly their attention that becomes very apparent in how these artists are processing their world. But the other part that I think is very important to consider is that they are also creating new visions. So they're trying to see the beauty of all those tensions within the world to create something new. I should also point out that Evans, she created with paper, Crayola crayons, so materials that she could easily access, that they were not uber expensive. She's not painting large canvases. That's an expensive materials. Lam is doing the same thing. That actually, if you get a chance to ever go to New York and see that beautiful work that we call painting, it's actually a work on paper, and it's actually also do with charcoal oil and pastel oils. So they're very much working with what they can get at their hand to create this very important and prevalent works.
And in the case of both of these works, they're really made the same year, 1943, so in the middle of World War. And in Evans's case, she was often reusing paper, as many Americans were urged to do at that time, because pulp was, there was scarcity around not only that, but pigments to make the crayons that she used, and so that really affected her art as well. But I also wanted to mention that part of why you followed this kind of line of inquiry, right, was María Elena curated a really amazing show a few years ago about Afro-diasporic surrealism and rethinking surrealism and surrealist practices, not only around the kind of like white and Euro-American or European artists that we associate with that movement, but also around many artists like Lam who were also engaged with dream interpretation, automatism, all of these other kinds of processes that the surrealists gave credence to. And Minnie Evans has this connection, as María Elena saw, and she included her in her exhibition, because her matrilineal, the ancestor that her family traces is a woman named Moni who was enslaved in Trinidad and trafficked to the United States via Charleston and then eventually marched to North Carolina. And so she had this kind of Trinidadian ancestry that she always spoke about, and this connection to Trinidad. Did you want to say something about that? Yeah.
Well, I actually wanted to say something about surrealism itself, because there's also the fact that André Breton, which you probably know as the father of surrealism, when the Nazis were invading France, him along with other intellectuals in Europe, and Wilfredo Lam, who's Cuban and did his training in Spain and also in France, they took a boat escaping the Nazis they first wanted to come to the US, but their visas were not approved, and they ended up in Martinique, a French colony or a French territory today. And there they met Suzanne and Aimé Césaire, who were two Martinican intellectuals who also spent time in Paris and who also aligned themselves with surrealism and who had already been writing about surrealism as a means for liberation and dream specifically as a means for liberation. So there's also like a factual historical moment that ties surrealism to the Caribbean and to Afro-diasporic practices.
And that's something that we've all talked about, is this idea too that Minnie Evans has always been compared to surrealists, again, since like the 1960s when people first started appreciating her art. But there's this kind of need moving forward to think about her in these much more global, right, contexts. And you were saying something. Will you talk a little bit about how self-taught artists can often get overly localized?
Yeah, I have two thoughts about that. So the one is, I'm a big appreciator of Southern artists and artists that work from their own imagination and impulse as opposed to academic training. And I noticed that oftentimes they are appreciated in a very regional way, so they are kind of put in place as references for the South, when actually they influence everything and everyone all over the world. So I think that's something that's really important that's happening, and I want to thank again Katherine and everybody that is bringing these artists to like a bigger platform. And the other thing I wanted to say is the way, why I'm here in a way is like I feel this artistic kinship with someone like Minnie Evans. And in terms of identity and what makes someone's identity, I feel like there is a rainbow of things that you can choose to define your own identity. And for me, it's like this aesthetic impulse and this way of looking at the world in colors, and this space on my mind's eye that I access, and then the way that my hand translates that connects me to groups of people all over the world as well, through the art that I am able to make and the art that they make. So in relation to that, in your essay you talk about rhizomatic expressions of art, and I wanted you to talk more about that, if you don't mind.
Yes, so in the essay I talk about another thinker in Caribbean thought, which is Edouard Glissant, in which he talks about the rhizome, right? And how, we're very used to thinking about history and about artistic practice in a very linear way, kind of thinking A, B, C, D, etc. However, artistic expressions and just cultural expressions at times are more connected than we are able to acknowledge and comprehend. In the case of Evans, she has this connections to the Caribbean, and then she grows up and is born here in the American South. But just because her practice emerged in the American South doesn't mean it's disconnected from this Caribbean history. So that's what I mean, that we're kind of all connected in this more nonlinear way of being or creating history. Just the same, when we think about our families, we might find out we have this third cousin that we never grew up with, yet we share a lot of connections to. So, that's what I feel like I mean.
Thank you.
Yeah, and the rhizome was such a great concept to bring to bear, too, because of what we were talking about before with the seeds and the natural forms of Evans's work, right? And the idea that the rhizomes don't just sprout one growth, but they kind of spread out underground and create all of these new kind of potential networks, right, and connections.
And I think that when we think about self-taught artists or any artist that is not part of like the mainstream art history that has been marginalized, often they get reduced to very specific, the same way that Evans potentially was reduced to just being one type of person in her world. When we start looking to the world and history in a more kind of rhizomatic or nonlinear, then we can see a wider connection and how they're part of a larger conversation of our history that just expands on what we know about surrealism as a movement in terms of, or creators in the American South. Suddenly they're just like this weird thing that just happened. Oh my God, how could she like do this? No, she could do it because, you know, she's actually part of a bigger imaginary.
Absolutely, and I also wanted to kind of use this moment to go a little bit into your art, Maria. It feels like the right time. So we can either start with this piece or we can start with your piece. Which would you prefer?
Let's talk about hers first
Okay.
for a minute. Yeah, so when I first saw the show at the opening, I came across this painting, and for a second I was like, did I make this painting? It's very much part of my imagine. Like, I see this image and I connect with it very deeply as an artist. The way that she composed it with the horizon line kind of at the center of the image, and there is this little opening on the right side where you see the ocean far away. That's a strategy that's like really sophisticated, of like opening a space in your painting where you're seeing the main scene, but there's also something that you can understand is over there that you could also go to and have a different experience. All the creatures that occupy the lower area, if you look at them, they might look a little bit monstrous, but at the same time, if you really look at them close up, they look very friendly. Like, most of them are smiling. Some of them are almost like 2 in 1, where like a serpent seems to be running through the body of the gray creature on the left, and then the angel on top, activating the upper area of the composition, where she also has this beautiful gradation from blue to pink for the sky. It's just incredible, you know. It's just I responded to this profoundly, and I also felt like a serious kinship with this type of image and composition. And if you want to go to the next one, yes. And then this is an example of my work where I think you can see the connection in terms of the composition, similar or horizon line, a lot of creatures in the lower area, a flying one in the upper area, or 2 flying creatures. The winged bird lady that I have in there is different than an angel, but in surrealism, bird woman is very common, and obviously it has a connection with an angel, right? It's a human figure with wings. And when I made this painting, I was actually very inspired by the environment that I was in. I was at an artist residency in Mexico, and my artist studio was across a pond. And in the pond, there were fish and birds, and they had 2 cows, and there were dogs, and nature was basically all around me. And there were humans too, because it was an artist residency, so there were a lot of these egos of the artists that I was talking about earlier. And I started to mix those 2 things, and I was also very inspired by a book that was at the Palafoxiana, which is the first library installed in the Americas, and it's in Puebla, in Mexico. And I stopped there, and they had 2 books by Athanasius Kircher, who is a German scholar from the 17th century. And one of the books was Arca Noé, or Noah's Ark. So it is also a biblical story. But he was an illustrator and a creator of, inventor. And the animals in his Arca Noé were clearly imagined. So I was fascinated by that book, because I was like, okay, this is supposedly a scholar, but I think he's bringing in his own imagination to bear on reality, as an artist does.
And so one of the things that you've touched on a little bit in your work, and also in Evans's, are these beasts, right? And they're kind of like hybrid nature, that there's multiple kinds of forms that seem to be enmeshed with one another, that they're like pathos. Are they evil? Are they kindly? Again, this like duality of, or kind of hybridity of form is happening. And so can we talk a little bit about the beasts, either as a curator who like sees these beasts in Lamb and other artists that you work with, and then as an artist who's creating them, like what is the beauty of the beast, right? How you get to use it and how you can read it.
Well, I can start. I remember when we talked previously, I had this question about her creatures because I know that she's inspired by biblical references, and I was like, I understand the angel, but what about these other animals or creatures or demons? You know, what are they? And you had a great answer, and you guys are gonna hear that in a minute. but then you. Anyway, I remember it if you don't. But what I came across is a film director from Argentina. Her name is Lucrecia Martel, and she also makes films that are very surrealist and that have characters that are sort of otherworldly sometimes. And she's talking about her films and talking about monsters. And in Spanish, the word monster doesn't have like the same references to like a serial killer or something. It's more like just something that's unusual. And she's talking about the etymology of the word in Latin, and it's mostrare, which is connected to mostrar, which is to show something or to point out something, and then monstrum or monster, which is a presage or like a premonition given through an apparition of something that's uncommon. And I was like, wow, that really connects with Minnie Evans and with her revelations and with her, environment as well. You know, like having maybe a sensation of menace or something that's coming up, and then maybe expressing that in the work with a creature that can be read as a beast or as a monster, but maybe it's bringing some information of something that is to come.
Thank you for reminding me what I said. Yes, so I equated the monster to our creolized form, and very much thinking about, in a lot of Afro-diasporic religions, there's always this mixture of symbols. And what I mean by that is that, for example, a deity in Haitian voodoo or in Santeria, Cuban Santeria, it's related to a particular deity or a loa, but also to a Christian person. So let's say, Dambala, which is Haitian loa, he is related to St. Patrick. So in a lot of places where people practice both of those practices, right, they're used to using camouflage and using kind of this decoy symbols to express the multiplicity of their identity. And what I mean is that they're not just purely adhering to, they're both Christian and they're both Afro-diasporic, right? So, and when you think about other practices that are like that, like carnival, right? So carnival was this moment in which enslaved people were able to, for one night, go outside and have a party, and they would do mass, and they would do, all this otherworldly gestures and otherworldly expressions to show again how their identities are multiple things, right? And in the case of Evans very much experienced different places, right? Or different, like what they called code switching. Like she very much was an in-house worker, an artist, a Christian, a woman, a mother. So the monster becomes this way of camouflaging her own experience as a kind of multiple or Creole person, right? That's what I said.
Yes, I love that.
Great. Just checking.
Do we have a few more minutes, or are you coming to tell me no? 2 minutes, okay. Well, that's not nearly enough time to really get into this next kind of part of the conversation, so I'm gonna just really summarize it. But we also talked a lot about dreams. I mean, this circles back to where we started, right? That dreams become a place where you can deal with the irrationality, the violence, the evil of everyday life. And Evans experienced that when she was 6 years old. The Wilmington Massacre unfolded. while she was living downtown in the city, so she was able to kind of smell the fires that these white supremacist mobs were setting all over Black-owned businesses. She was able to kind of hear the gunshots of this machine gun that you see on the right that was being wheeled through the streets and killed countless Black people. We don't really know how many people died in that massacre to this day. This was when she was 6 years old, or she was about to turn 6. And then, of course, it was more than just that moment. She made a work about nightmares she started having after that night because people hid in the cemeteries. They didn't feel safe staying in their homes. The cemeteries were tree canopied, so they were a place where you could hide. And this is a piece that she credited to a nightmare she started having about hiding in a cemetery. But the point is, it wasn't just that night, right? It was this whole lifetime of service in Wilmington as it was kind of reset by this massacre. The goal of the white supremacist mobs was not just to have this day, a night of violence, but really to reverse all of the progress that Black citizens had been making for decades. And so Evans came of age in this moment when racial tension across the city was at an all-time high. So this is a group portrait of the servants who served the owners of the estate where she worked, and we think that she's the person in the white head covering here. Nobody was identified in this photograph, but based on other photographs of her, and when I think it was taken, I think that's her, and that one of the children sitting before her is one of her 3 sons. But all to say that she experienced a lot, right? And when you see works like these incredibly beautiful, overflowing, joyful pieces, there's a kind of also an undercurrent of tension, right? Of this, of things that are not being said, these sealed lips of all of these faces that appear at the center of her forms, these staring eyes that could be the eyes, her eyes, everything that she saw and maybe couldn't speak about, but also the eyes that watched her, right, at all times for propriety of what a Black woman should be doing in that time. So I wanted to put that out there and also bring this up because for you've talked a lot about in your practice how surrealism, dreams, the fantastical become this realm where you can explore the kind of atrocities of history, right? So how is that useful for you as an artist? How does this mixture of fantasy and reality kind of work for you?
Yeah, I think it goes back a little bit to what I was talking about with the first question, which is this empowering sense of on the artwork, you are the one that is organizing the reality that you're presenting. So even if things around you or historically have not been accepting, or what you want to give is not really taken, I think there is a lot of resistance and combative, but in a good way, type of attitude in the sense of insisting. I do have something to say, and I am going to say it through my artwork, and I feel like that's one of the things that I admire the most of Minnie Evans. I mean, first of all, it makes me very hopeful for the future because she started when she was 56, and that is incredible. And then the output that she was able to put out into the world after living all of these experiences, it's sort of like a great resistance to say, life force is still in me, creation is in me, and I am going to give a speculative, imaginative, reality through my work. I'm going to present this as a possibility that is not the one that is surrounding me, but it's the one that I made. So yeah, it's just a great attitude to have.
Did you want to say anything on that, or are you?
Yes, that I think, looking at this work, there's so much, she worked in a garden, and I'm sure that there were many days that she felt overlooked by not only the visitors of the garden, or even the owners of the garden. So when the garden is looking back at you, it's almost like she looking back at us too, So I think there's a lot of kind of agency there and power that then I can go on and talk about lamb and all that other stuff, because certainly she's making herself be present.
All right, I think we're going to switch over to your questions, but we can continue any of these topics. So I think, Ro, it's the time to bring up the QR code for people to use. So it doesn't seem like people are using it. I'm not sure if it's not working or we're just not into the QR code situation. But so we can also do it the old-fashioned way, if that is preferred.
People are not using their phones anymore in 2026.
Yeah, right. It's not cool. There is some scanning. Okay. Part of why we do this, just so you know, is because when we have a lot of questions from the audience, this allows you to see where people are asking the same kinds of things, so we can address a question that multiple people are asking, because we often have very limited time. But yeah, if I know it's not always so intuitive, so we can also go for the, oh, we have one, okay, good. Oh, this is a lovely question. So did any of Minnie's children or grandchildren inherit her ability and or talent to translate dreams into art? So they have not become artists. She had 3 sons, and then they all had families, and so she had tons of grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And her granddaughter, Minnie, who was named after her, was a talented musician. So there was a kind of like artistic and creative passing on for that child. But none of them have become artists or have like had this kind of intense kind of association with their dream life that I've learned of. And the family, is very much still alive, mostly still in North Carolina, not all in Wilmington. But they've been kind of a great part of celebrating her legacy in the moment of this exhibition. There's a wonderful essay by her great-grandson, Wayne, who, though he was her great-grandson, he knew her really well because he grew up in her house. And so I, again, encourage you to see get the catalog, or at least like see it in our gift shop, so that you can read some of the wonderful things that he wrote that were his memories of Minnie as an artist, because he also could tell what she was like when she was working, which none of us were there for that. But so he shares some memories of what it was like to just be around her when she was in this kind of, not like a trance-like state, but just really, in conversation with her drawing and kind of lost to the world a bit. Oh, interesting. This is about the third angel piece that we can't show it, but it was the one that Maria was speaking about. And the snakes are prominently colored in Pan-African flag, which I had never thought about that, but I can visualize it. So they were black, green, and red. Do you want to talk about why, or that might be, or what, or just the way that Pan-Africanism shows up in the work of other artists at all, or? You don't have to.
I mean, we don't know why she did that,
right,
but it's an interesting coincidence.
Yeah.
So, and we know that we know that she had access to knowledge and she had access to the world. And what I'm trying to say with that is that she worked, in a house where there were a lot of objects, there were a lot of conversations and meetings. So it's easy to assume that maybe she didn't, but maybe she did because of the world that she inhabited. Obviously, she's thinking about the Second World War and the planes, so she's very much in tune with what's going on. And snakes are also symbols of knowledge. They're the ones in the Garden of Eden that kind of tempts Adam and Eve, but they're also symbols of transformation in a lot of specifically in Nahuatl or Aztecs cultures, and just as an animal that sheds skin, so it's very much of a transformative spirit. So I wouldn't be surprised if, I haven't kind of got deep into the research, if why is choosing that animal, given its symbolism in Christianity and also just in kind of general culture. And then those colors are quite suspicious.
And she did a number of works that are in the show about the Lion of Judah, which is, of course, a Christian religious symbol, but also associated with Ethiopian independence and Black power in her era. And so there's definitely, she was probably, and then there's another work in the show too that's called A Dream, that probably refers to Martin Luther King's speech. She made it in 1968, probably responding to his assassination. And so all to say that she was kind of tuned in to...
then it's easy to conclude that, because, when you think about the snake as a source of knowledge, you know.
Right, so and I think that a lot of the time, like I love that observation that whoever wrote that question made, because I had not noticed that, but I think it's all valid. Like there's an amazing piece in the show too, where I think that she saw at one point, the same way she could have seen Pan-African flags, photographic reproductions of this really important temple that was erected in Trinidad in 1952. And she creates that temple and puts it on the shores of Wilmington, North Carolina. And the kind of, again, like aesthetic resonances between this like whitewashed temple that she created and this architecture that was completed in Trinidad is just really compelling. And we don't have proof that she definitely saw a photograph of it, but she read all these magazines all the time. She read the newspaper, and she had these interests, right? So it's very valid, I think, to make that observation. So a quick question that probably I know is always on people's minds when I talk to them about her reception is, did she enjoy any economic success from her work? And yes, she did. She had a lot of showings in galleries in New York, Chicago, London in the 60s and 70s. And the work wasn't selling for like huge astronomical prices that it kind of sells for now today. But she was making money like in a significant way during her lifetime. And then when she died, her family retained her work and sold it through predominantly one gallery in New York, but also locally over the kind of subsequent decades. So she did have, she and her descendants did have that economic windfall, or I don't know what I'm looking for, but they benefited economically, from it. Okay, there's so many questions, and this is one that I wanted to throw to the group because it hits on some of the things that we've been talking about. But dreams and visions are deeply personal. Can you speak about the vulnerability of Evans in sharing these, and if that is an integral part of surrealism?
I love that question. So I think that there is a lot of power that is not seen sometimes in vulnerability, or I was thinking about even a flower or a piece of paper in the context of art making. Sometimes paper is considered like a minor material to use. It's considered like not as durable or archival, but when you actually think about drawings that we have available at museums, if you care for this material, it can exist for, millions of years. And, or maybe not millions, but many, many years, thousands of years. And with the flowers and the natural world, it's the same thing where people sometimes are like, oh, a flower represents, this fragile beauty and notions of femininity, and it should be given to women. And it's like, sure, if you cut the flower and you put in a vase, it will die pretty soon. But if it is in nature, it is a force of nature. Like flowers will keep growing. They're resilient. They're very strong. Just like paper is also very strong. So I think with dreams and the personal, it's like the more you go into your individuality and your subjectivity, and the more you're able to put that on a work of art, I feel like the more universal it also becomes, because we are all united. Like we're not that different. So I feel like that's the way that I understand art making, and like the personal, really, when you offer it to others very honestly, it becomes very universal.
Yeah, I think that, surrealism is, like, going back to kind of like the historic capital H, the mainstream history of surrealism. Surrealism emerged in a moment in which Europe was at war, in which, after the Industrial Revolution, here we are killing ourselves, first in the First World War and then on the Second World War. And it's interesting now that we're in 2026 that we don't remember that European history is actually marked by a lot of wars, and we actually experienced a time where there hasn't been that many wars in that continent. That being said, surrealism reacted to that moment thinking things are crazy, for lack of a better word. How can we find means of liberation? Let's reject all the logic. Let's reject all the reason that has brought us to fascism, and let's go into the spiritual. So it wasn't only dreams, it was also tarot card readings, automatism. It was really thinking about other ways of knowledge that can perhaps help us create a new world, a different world than the atrocities that were happening at that time in Europe and also in this continent as well. So there's certainly a degree of vulnerability there in terms of thinking, let's go back to ourselves to create something new. But I enjoy thinking about it also as a powerful aspect that we can create a new world through our means, and that belief is really what we need in order to kind of create that impulse to change our reality. I think that in her case specifically, as a woman, a Black woman working in the South, there's certainly a lot of, that's why we mentioned courage earlier, to believe that she can also contribute.
Yes, and playing on this, her identity, there's a great question. As a woman who started at 56, and I should say that she did actually start drawing in her early 40s, but it was 56 was when she came to the gardens opened publicly and she became the gatekeeper as opposed to a domestic worker. So that's when she got to spend all this time in the garden. So it started in her early 40s, but anyway, this question is still very valid because as a woman who started in middle age, do you want to speak about women post-childbearing age and voices that can appear at this life stage? Do you see that reflected? Yes. And this is something that I said in my essay. Nobody has ever mentioned that this all happened to her, or she started acting on it at least. She was having dreams since childhood, but these like intense visions, and then this creative explosion happens like in the era of menopause and in this time of physiological and social change in her life. So not just when her body chemistry is changing in ways that can create hot flashes and things that feel like, a vision, but also she's been a mother her whole life, and it still is, but like her kids are now adults themselves, and eventually many of them do move back and live with her, with their families, but they're not there yet. Like her 50s are this time of freedom before she's like got all of these other children kind of at her feet again. And so I think this is so, and then her grandmother dies, this woman who raised her. So it's all of these kinds of like major life changes that happen to people at midlife. You lose your elders, your children, if you had them, are grown, your body changes no matter what. Like all of these things were happening to her. And I think that so much of the time with self-taught artists, we lean too far into their, fantastical kinds of ways of describing what happened to them. And we forget that they're people who have all of these same life changes, right? That so many of us have. So thank you for that question. And yeah.
I want to ask, because I find that quite beautiful. I have my mom, she's hopefully retiring fully this year. And I think that sometimes in our culture, we forget that just because we reach certain milestones, that's it. And I think that the power of she thinking, I can take on another identity after I'm not a mother anymore, or a daughter anymore, or a like that's where I want to be at. Like I want to be able to see myself growing and becoming something else. And I feel like that's like we should all, I think there's like also a lot of an industry to be emerge. Like how can we have a different life after a certain age?
Yeah, it's really an inspiration, and it also makes you hopeful for what's to come, which I feel like for women of a certain age, sometimes you're just like, you know, what?
But men too. Like I asked my husband, when are you gonna retire? And he doesn't give me a date. And I'm thinking, okay, so you're gonna be pushed out, but you need to think out what else you wanna do with your life.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's a great note to end on. We know we're a little bit over time. Let's all have hope for the future. And please feel free to come up and ask questions that we didn't get to. Sorry we couldn't get to them all. Thank you all so much for coming.